Hello and welcome to another IELTS Learning Tips video. My name's Bernie Wall, and for those of you that haven't met me before, I am an IELTS trainer and I work in particular with students who need band 7 and 8 in their IELTS exam. And in this video today, I want to address something which causes a lot of students to lose marks in the IELTS, and that is recording your answers correctly on the answer sheet when you transfer them in the listening paper. And I've known when working with students, sometimes students losing up to 10 points, not because they got the questions incorrect while listening, but because they wrote them down wrongly. And so I want to look at why this happens and how you can avoid it. So I have, as ever, a little PowerPoint which I'll share with you, and we'll have a look at how you can stop losing these marks unnecessarily. So it's really important that you don't lose marks because you write the questions, the answers to the questions down incorrectly. It's quite tragic when that happens. So we'll look at reasons why it happens and then how you can avoid it. So let me just move this along. So why does it happen? There are several reasons. It could be that you're in a rush, that you want to finish it quickly, sometimes due to nerves, but sometimes students are rushing and then they make silly mistakes. Another reason is that you might have missed the last few questions or perhaps some questions earlier and you're trying to recall these, and that causes you then to do your transfer in a hurry. A third reason, and I think this is the main reason for most people, is what I call a lack of vigilance, that you are transferring your answers from the answer sheet but not really taking a lot of notice of exactly what you're transferring. And the transfer section, the last 10 minutes, I think it is to transfer, is a time when you can just very quickly double check your answers. And if you're vigilant about doing this, then you may make fewer mistakes with the transfer. So how can we avoid it? Firstly, it is a part of the exam. It is the last 10 minutes of the exam. So it's a good idea to practice it. And as you practice it, a lot of the things I'm going to say shortly will start to come up for you and you'll notice them. And that means you will then not make any mistakes with this transfer. The things that are likely to cause your answers to become incorrect, even though you heard the right information, are things like grammar and spelling. So be aware of the question. Certain types of question, you need to watch the grammar. You need to make sure that the grammar is correct. Also, if you have any issues around spelling, that's something you need to address, because if you spell them wrongly, you will lose the point. And finally, as I mentioned before, you can use this transfer time to check your answers as you copy them down. Now, you won't be able to check every answer, but there are specific types of question where having it grammatically correct is really important, and you can pay a little bit more attention to those types of question. Okay. So here are, I would say, the 5 most common errors that come up when transferring your listening answers onto the sheet. The first I mentioned before, spelling. So that's something to be careful of. Grammar is a big cause. Sometimes extra words is actually a very big cause in my experience, and that's just clumsy. Missing words where you haven't actually used enough words. And finally, sometimes punctuation. So let's take those in turn. There is a possibility, if there is an unusual or technical word in the listening that is uncommon, that any approximate spelling will be accepted. And that is possible, but it's not that common. It's only going to be a handful of words, maybe only 1 word or 2 words in a listening test, but that does happen sometimes. You can use either US or UK spellings. So where there's not a common, where the words are common, you will be expected to spell them correctly. UK and US are fine, but it's better to be consistent. Don't use a US one and then a UK one. Try to use one or the other. If there are any words that you always get wrong, and I'm sure there'll be 1 or 2, make sure that you check these especially. And make sure also before you do the exam that you memorize them so you won't make that mistake. So the only way of improving spelling is by memorizing spellings. In English-speaking countries, in primary school, we spend a lot of time learning spelling. It's a huge thing at primary school here. So it's the only way really, is when you learn a new word, make sure you know the spelling. If there are words that you keep spelling wrongly, then try and memorize the correct spelling. And you can spend, 5 or 10 minutes here and there to make sure you know them. Okay, grammar. In my experience, this is the biggest issue in transfer. These are the types of question where this can occur. So where you have a sentence completion, because remember, where you're filling in gaps, that sentence must be 100% correct grammatically. Short answers often need to be also grammatically correct and fit the question. And finally, any kind of summary. Summaries are not so common in listening, it's more in reading, and it's also true in reading. But there are some types of question which are a little bit like a summary, and wherever there's a gap to fill, it should be grammatically correct, the answer. It has to be right. If it's not right, then the answer is wrong, even though you got the right information. Sometimes you might need to change a word. So you might need to make a singular noun that you hear into a plural noun, and the question will tell you, is there an article? If there isn't an article, it probably needs to be plural. If there is an article and it's plural in the listening, you may need to change it to singular. It will not be a difficult grammatical change in listening, but you need to be aware that that sometimes happens. Okay, so check your question. There's not much time while you're listening to think about these things, so just write down what you hear. But when you transfer on any of these types of question that I've mentioned, just have an extra little look to make sure that you've got the word in the right form. Okay, this is another place where students often lose marks. It's very, very common for students to include a word in their answer that is already in the question. And that's because it came in the listening. If you repeat a word, even though the examiner knows it's a mistake, they will check that answer as you write it. And if you've got a repeated word, then the answer is not correct because you're repeating something in the question, so it will not make sense. So be very, very careful that you don't repeat a word that's already in the question. When you have a word limit, usually it's 1, 2, or 3 words. If it says 3 words, you don't necessarily need 3 words, but make sure that you work out how many words you actually need. So do you need all 3? Do you only need 1? Or do you need 2? And again, the question will give you the answer to that. Sometimes it's possible to have 2 words or 3 words. There are options within the listening, but whatever you choose, it must make sense as an answer to that question. So again, check the question very carefully and work out which of the 3 words you hear you actually need. And also make sure that it's not a 3-word question. If it's a 2-word question, don't put 3 words. If it's a 1-word question, don't put 2 words. This is another mistake that students sometimes make by not reading the instructions carefully. and this is a lack of vigilance. If you put extra words, they can also result in a grammar error. So for example, if you put in an article and there's already an article at or the in the question, then you have a double article, so it's also grammatically wrong. So just be that little bit extra careful. Okay, this is the other side of the coin. So it will also be wrong if you don't put enough words. So if you've got 3 words allowed, have a look and see how many of those words you need. If you just put 1 word, does it make sense? Do you need 2 words or do you need 3? If they go together as you hear, it's likely that you can use all 3. But sometimes you might only need 2, and the question is the place to work this out. Okay, do you need an article? Again, if it's a gap fill, a sentence completion, make sure you look at whether there is an article or not, so you know whether it should be singular or plural. If there's a table or a chart where you've already got examples given, look at the examples. How are they written down? Are they plural? Do they have capital letters? Are there 2 words? Are there 1 word? Use that as a guide. And finally, the more you practice this, the more you will get an idea for what kinds of things are going to cause these mistakes. And then you'll be aware of them, and the more aware you are and the more you focus, then the fewer mistakes you'll make and the quicker you'll be able to do it. And finally, a word on punctuation. It's not really so important in listening, except for capital letters. Now, I know sometimes students write the whole thing in capital letters, but there is a danger there because it could backfire. If there are words where you absolutely need a capital letter to be shown, if it's all in caps, then the examiner will have a dilemma. So write it as you would normally write. If it's correct, you're not going to lose a point. There's no dilemma. So write as you would normally write the punctuation. Names of people, names of places, these all have capital letters. If you have a chart or a table, look at how they're written. The examples are written on the chart or the table and follow that same pattern. Remember, in a sentence completion, sometimes you might have to supply the first word or the first 2-3 words in a sentence. And the first word in a sentence always has a capital letter, so it will be expected. So these small clues will help you to choose whether you need to worry about punctuation or not. So it's better to get it right than to do something foolish and get it wrong. So use the normal conventions. If you're not sure, look at the examples. Sometimes it doesn't matter, but sometimes it does. So it's making sure you know when it does and when it doesn't. So just be extra specially careful because you do not want to throw away marks in your listening because you write down the answers incorrectly. And by practicing it as part of your listening practice, I think you can avoid this problem altogether. So I hope that was useful. I have written an article on this which gives a little bit more information and detail, and you can find that on my website, which is IELTSlearningtips.com, and you'll also find a few free resources there. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.